it's Hailey, and today I'm going to be talking about some of my personal favorite young adult romance books. A portion of today's video is kindly sponsored by Fox Next Games. If you like reading or writing like me, then you're definitely going to love the Storyscape app. It is so cool. You basically get to be inside of a book, and it's like an interactive storytelling experience. There are all sorts of different authors and writers that write these stories, and you get to pick how the story goes because each decision you make influences the course of the story, and it is so cool. So I have been playing the Titanic story, and there are so many things I love about this. One of them being that it's very risky, you're not guaranteed a happy ending, and the fact that you get to influence everything is so cool, but also the graphics and the story itself is really good. The Titanic story is just one of the many ones that they have, and they are constantly updating with new episodes and stories, so definitely check it out. If you did want to check out the Storyscapes app, I will have a link down below for you guys. And thank you once again to Fox Next Games for sponsoring this portion of the video. So I have spent so much time talking about adult romances recently because I have been obsessed. That is kind of where my summer and really my 2019 reading year ended up going, was mostly to adult romances. But I recognize that there are some of you who don't want to read adult books and aren't really into the explicitness that can come with those romances, but you might still want a romance. So YA is where we are turning today, and I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite contemporary YA romances specifically. I might do a video focusing on fantasy and like all of that stuff. If you would like that, definitely let me know, but today I wanted to focus on realistic fiction. So I think I have a pretty good pile of books here. They're definitely ones that I love. It's like my master list, so you have probably heard me talk about all of these before, but I'm excited to delve more into their romantic side. So let's get into my list. First up is By Your Side by Casey West. Casey West has so many contemporary romances, and I find that they're a little bit hit or miss for me. I think I've read 4 of them, and 2 of them I wasn't a huge fan of, but the other 2, this one included, I really enjoy. This one is a personal favorite though, because it just is like this bookish romance, and that is chef's kiss amazing. So in this book we follow Autumn Collins, and she ends up locked in a library for a weekend with Dax Miller, and Dax is this troubled teenager. He's not exactly who you would like to be locked in a library with, but like really it's just the setting for romance. Locked in a library, like you know that something is gonna happen. So you delve further into this enemies to lovers sort of romance and watch their relationship develop, and it is just, ugh, it's so cute. But the entire book isn't set in the library, so there's also the will their relationship last beyond the walls of the library and the books and the romance of the library, will it last? That got very dramatic, but honestly, if you are looking for a quick weekend romance read, definitely check this one out. Next, we have a book that I have talked about quite a bit recently, but will I stop talking about it? Probably not anytime soon, and that is Her Royal Highness by Rachel Hawkins. This is a female-female romance between Millie and Flora. Flora is the Princess of Scotland, and Millie is just an average, everyday American teen who is going through a breakup, and she decides to cope with her breakup in the only way that you really can, which is by applying for a boarding school as far as possible away from her ex, and that ends up being in Scotland. So she ends up getting a scholarship, and she arrives in Scotland at this beautiful boarding school, only to find that she is rooming with Princess Flora, the Princess of Scotland. The two don't exactly hit it off because they are quite opposite, and Flora is a little bit hard to get along with, but we have this enemies to lovers romance. It's one of my favorite enemies to lovers romances because that's not my favorite trope, but in this, I loved it. There's one scene in particular that just, oh, it warms my heart. It was so cute. So if you are looking for an adorable romance between 2 lovely characters that features witty banter, opposites attract, enemies to lovers, what else could you ask for? It's set in the Highlands of Scotland. Have I sold you on it yet? Try it out. Next is Wanderlost by Jen Malone. I picked this book up on a whim because I was going through a phase of reading all the European travel books before I went on my own backpacking trip across Europe, and this gave me everything I wanted. So it follows the main character Aubrey, and Aubrey, she was not expecting to go to Europe. She was not prepared to go to Europe at all, but she ends up going to Europe. So her sister was actually the one who was supposed to go on this trip to Europe, but her sister ends up getting in trouble, and instead Aubrey has to go in her place. But she's not just going to have fun, she's going to lead this tour group of old people around Europe. How cute. The tour company can't know that she's not her sister though, so she has to kind of tell some lies to be there and has to pretend to be her sister, and that's kind of made complicated by the fact that she starts falling for the tour company owner's son. I love travel novels, specifically European travel novels. They just have a special place in my heart. I mean, I'm writing my own, so like obviously I love them, but the romance in this one was so cute, and also the added element of the group of elderly people was just great. Everything about this was heartwarming, an easy, quick, romantic read. Next is Autobiography by Christina Lauren. I don't actually know where my copy of this book went. I know I had it at some point, but I can't find it anywhere, so it is somewhere in the ether, who knows where. But this is a male-male romance. The main character, Tanner, is bisexual and he has been out, but then he moves to Utah in a place that isn't as accepting as where he used to live, so he has to go back into the closet, which is obviously very difficult. At his new school, he decides to take this course where you write a novel. It's basically like NaNoWriMo except over a school semester. So you have to write a novel over the course of the school course. Now, Sebastian is a Mormon prodigy who took this class in the past, and he ended up actually selling the novel that he wrote. So now he's mentoring the class. And when Tanner and Sebastian meet and end up falling in love, it's a very complicated relationship, but it is also just great. You might recognize the name Christina Lauren, especially if you've been listening to me talk about adult romance, because that author duo is one of my favorites for adult romance. They are the ones who introduced me to it with Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating, but this is actually the first book that I read by them, was their teen novel. I don't think they have any other teen novels, but this is very different than their adult romance, but it is still adorable and romantic, but also makes you think a lot. That's where it kind of is a departure from their typical adult romance. It deals with some heavy, hard-hitting topics that can make it a little bit difficult to read at times, but I think it was very, very well done, and I really loved it. Next is, of course, To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. How can I talk about young adult romances without talking about this book? Answer, I can't. If you haven't seen the movie or heard of this book, one, you should change that. Two, it follows Lara Jean and her family and her really crazy love life. So Lara Jean is a hopeless romantic, and whenever she had a crush on a boy, she would write them this love letter and never send it. She would just seal it and put it away, and then she would get over them. That was her way to move on. But at the beginning of this novel, those letters end up getting sent to all of the people that she ever had a crush on or loved, and they're years old letters, but unfortunately now the conflict and the fallout from that is her present, and she has to deal with all of it, and there ends up being a fake relationship. Fake dating is one of my favorite tropes. I really love it. And honestly, Lara Jean could have ended up with anyone, in my opinion, in these books over the course of this trilogy, and I wouldn't be mad about it. It was just so good. Like, there's baking in it, and there's just so much heart in these stories with the family, and just everything about it is adorable, and once again, just a heartwarming romance, and I think like a perfect Valentine's Day read, but really a perfect anytime read. Next is Just One Day by Gayle Forman, but specifically the whole duology and the novella, because you can't just read the one, honestly. You have to finish the whole thing. This is once again set while traveling Europe, so it follows Allison, who is on a high school trip for her senior year. She's done high school, going into college, but they go on this trip around Europe, and it is the tail end of her trip. She is in England, and she is going to this Shakespeare play, and when she's there, she ends up meeting this Dutch boy named Willem, and they end up taking this whirlwind, unexpected trip without really even knowing each other to Paris for a day, and they spend that whole day together. And then over the course of these two books and the novella, there's this impossible love story that develops that's very angsty, but also so lovely and just great. I preferred the second book over the first book, but as a whole, the whole duology was fantastic, and once again, that travel romance has a special place in my heart. Speaking of travel romances, next is Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by Morgan Matson. Morgan Matson is one of my favorite contemporary authors, and I think that this would have to be my favorite book by her. This is a romance that is set on a road trip going across America, so a little bit different than the ones that I've talked about before, but Amy's family is moving across the country, and she is still dealing with the grief of the loss of her father. It's still very fresh for her. He died in a car accident, so she's not comfortable driving anymore, but she has to get their car with some of their belongings across the country to where they are moving to. So she is given a travel companion known as Roger. He is a family friend that she ends up developing a relationship with as they take all sorts of detours on their way to her new home. There's kind of a multimedia sort of element to this. Like there's different playlists and stuff. I can't find any examples. This is always what happens to me. There we go. So there's different playlists and pictures and almost little diary entries. And that for me is what made this book. It really brought me to traveling with them and watching their relationship develop. This book had a little bit of everything as far as romance goes, because there was the character development and emotional development, but also the development of their relationship together as they traveled across the country, and I loved it. Next is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. This book follows Kath, who's in her first year of college, so it's a little bit on the older end of YA, but Kath is on her own for the first time without her twin sister. She expected them to go through college together as they've gone through everything together, but she ended up surprising her and being like, nope, I want to go on my own. So Kath wasn't exactly prepared for that, but she meets Levi, who is one of the best book boyfriends. He's really great. And it's very much a coming of age story, and once again, a sort of bookish romance, and definitely, I mean, for fangirls, if you're a big fan of anything. This book is actually where the fantasy novel Carry On came from. It is featured. The Simon Snow universe is what Kath is such a big fangirl of. And this is once again a book that has a lot of emotional development for the characters as well as that romantic development, and watching their relationship progress was very interesting because it's kind of a bumpy road, but it was great. And this is like a book that honestly has tiny, tiny font. Like, it's so tiny. Tiny, tiny, tiny. I can't even believe it. And like the spaces are so small too. But I read this book in a day. I remember one November day, I just sat down and I read the entire thing, and I read 3 books in that day too. So I don't know how I did that, but if you're looking for a quick fangirl read and you are a big fangirl of things, I think you'd probably really like this romance. Next is Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. Once again, if you haven't read the book or seen the movie, this features a male-male romance, and it is a relationship that starts over email, and then someone ends up blackmailing Simon into telling everyone that he's gay because no one knows that he's gay. Simon isn't out yet, but he has developed this relationship via email, and then when that person finds out, they just end up being a terrible person and blackmailing him. So this book is a very layered romance, and you can't help but root for the couple to end up together in the end, which is one of my favorite things. You also have the mystery of who is it that he's emailing, because you don't know who the love interest is, and I think that added a lot to the romance for me. And finally, I feel like it would be remiss of me to talk about young adult romances without mentioning The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This tragic, iconic love story that touched the hearts of so many when it came out, I think back in 2012, and then it was adapted into a movie, so I'm sure you are probably familiar with the story in some sort of way. It's a metaphor, you know, all of that jazz, but it is still one of my favorite romances. I'm not gonna lie. It follows 2 teenagers who are both ill with cancer and the relationship that unfolds between them, and it's great, honestly. If you haven't read it, I think it's definitely worth the read. So those are all of the young adult romances that I have to talk to you guys about today. I hope that you enjoyed this video and it gave you some ideas if you are feeling in the romantic spirit to read some young adult romances, and maybe if you want to try out some adult romances. I did do a book haul of them recently, so I'll link that down below for you guys, and I've talked about a lot of them, but I might do a video like this as well in the new year where I recommend some of my favorites for you guys if you would like that. But if you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to click that subscribe button and then click that bell icon so you'll be notified whenever I post. I post new videos twice a week, but we are getting into Bookmas, so I will be posting a video every other day for the month of December, all the way until 2020. So lots of content is coming for you guys. You can also keep up with me on my social media. All of my handles and links and all that jazz are down below for you guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!